Can you please introduce yourself and tell how long you've lived in Putnam?
I sure can. I'm Ron Coderre. I go by the Ronald P. Coderre. I'm always proud of my middle initial, so Paul, after my father. And I came here from New York when I was about 3 years old, so I've been in Putnam for 81 years. I'm proud of the place. I think it's my community, except for going into service for 4 years and going away to college. I've always lived here in Putnam and have good, fond recollections of Putnam. I'm a graduate of Putnam High School, class of 1959. And after high school, I went into the Air Force, which if in 1959, Observe a Patriot, you look in, you'll see the picture of Benny Ogier and myself joining the Air Force. I still have that clipping. And when I got out of the Air Force, I went to college at Assumption University, and that's where I graduated from. So that's kind of my history in a nutshell.
How old were you in August of 1955?
August of 1955, I was thinking about it this morning. I knew I was 14 years old, but then I was thinking from March 13th to August 19th, that's another 5 months. So I was 14 years and 5 months old. And on that morning, I can tell you what happened, because every time the river would get high, and it happened quite frequently, anytime Putnam had heavy rains, there was flooding in the lower Manhasset village all the time, and the river got high just below the bridges, and it was exciting to watch, and the falls got very active, and actually they really showed their energy over the falls. And my father used to wake us up and say the river's high, and we'd go down by the river just to watch it because it was so exciting. So that morning of August 19th, he woke me up, and I walked up the street. I lived on Sunnyside Avenue. That's where our family's house was. And I walked up the street, and his name was really Richard Angelo, but his middle name was Michael, and we called him Mike Angelo. He lived up the street, and I went to get him. And together we walked down the Laurel Street Hill, you know, the big hill. We're across from, it's now the Veterans Park. And we went on Bridge Street, over the bridge to the other side of the river. And when we were crossing the bridge on Bridge Street, the water was probably about maybe 2 feet below the bridge, but rising at that time. But it was exciting for us to watch that. We didn't know how dangerous it was, to tell you the truth. So he and I walked across, and we got down to probably to the end of the street where Roger Dones lived in I think it was a Victorian house, and Bill Pigeon's barbershop was across the street, and Prassis, the shoe man, the cobbler, was also on that corner. And they had all their flags up on their porch, their banners, because we had just celebrated the centennial of 1955, 100 years old. And so while we were there, and watching these people on their porch, drinking coffee, having a good time, waving to everybody and all this stuff, and started to watch the storm drains backing up instead of taking water in. And that's when we decided we better get ourselves back across the river. So we took back off to go over the bridge, and by now the river had even risen more, and it was very close to hitting the sides of the bottom of the bridge. And so we got across, and we got to the corner where today Veterans Park is located, but there was some 2-decker, 4-apartment houses on the left-hand side of Bridge Street. My Cat's Market was on the right-hand side. And the Texaco station was still there, of course. And the Texaco station, Matt Rondo played an integral part in saving somebody's life later on. I can tell you that story if you care to hear it. But McAvoy lived in the house that's still there. It's painted nicely now. I forget what colors. It's multicolored house. And so we sat on the lawn of McAvoy's house, and the first heroic act that I saw during the flood occurred right there. While we were sitting there, the first house that I described on the left-hand side, one of the families that lived in there was a family called the Dubucs, D-U-B-U-C, Alfred Dubuc and his family. His wife Rose, who was a hairdresser, and his 3 children, his 2 sons and his daughter. And so while we were there, now the river is really getting high, and it's starting to expand, and it's starting to come right down Church Street, right past McAvoy's house where we were sitting on the lawn, okay? That Church Street became part of the river eventually during the flood, and a lot of activity happened there because the town hall was right there. So while we were sitting there, here comes Mr. Dubuc out of the house. The water's up to here, up to his chest, and he's carrying his wife on his shoulders. And he wades his way through and puts her on the lawn right next to us, goes back, comes out with his daughter on his shoulders, puts her down, goes back, comes out with one of his sons, puts him down, and then does the same thing. He took all 4 of his family members out of that house on his shoulders. And that was the first thing that we saw, and that has always stuck in my mind ever since that day of August 19th.
Yeah.
So I don't know where you want me to go from there, but I can tell you a few other stories too.
Please do. Please do.
Okay.
Tell us your memories.
So we lived on Sunnyside Avenue, up behind the town hall, and the police station was there at the time, I believe. And so we were on high ground, and we could see everything. And of course, as a kid, I was very curious, so I was down there on the lawn of the town hall. And in my own story that I wrote, I talk about the tree that saved the life of one of the National Guardsmen. And I said in my story 20 years ago, that tree is still there, but it's no longer there. They cut it down this year. And it's in a way, for me, it's kind of sad, but they should commemorate some of these things, I think. And I will tell you, I hate to digress and jump all over the place, but every August 19th, I kind of walk by where the French River came across and joined with the Quinnebog. And all I see is in that shopping area, people walking like nothing ever happened here. And I think we should have a plaque in the ground that says, August 19th, 1955, this was the site of blah, blah, the devastating flood of 1955. We should also probably put a plaque where the water rose, how high it was, because it was tremendously high right around there. But anyway, so I would go down to the town hall lawn and watch the activities. And during the day, of course, it was bright, it was light, but at night they would have big spotlights because the National Guard was there, and they were kind of coordinating it. And I think John Gahan might have been the commander, but I don't want to say for sure that he was. But he might have been the commander of that National Guard unit. And I don't know if it was the first night or the second night of the flood, but what I saw was the next most heroic thing that I think I witnessed during the flood anyway, and that was behind Church Street, where the Cassatteri house was Chapel Street. I don't know if people realize where Chapel Street was. Chapel Street started right after Cassateri's house. It went towards the river, bent to the left, went across to just before the bridge on Bridge Street, crossed over Bridge Street, and continued up to almost where the police station and all that is today. And so behind Cassateri's house was a house that 2 elderly people were stuck in. And so the National Guard decided that they would go and rescue these people. So 2 guys went. I don't know, I only know one guy's name, and I don't know who the other one was, but Dick Gaynor, who was only a young man at the time. In fact, the story goes that during the Korean War, he was in the National Guard, and he left high school because the National Guard was called up to active duty. I don't know where they went, and he was an 18-year-old kid, so he wasn't very old then. And he and another guy waded across Church Street where the river was flowing, and it kept getting more and more intense. And they went through the cafeteria house, out the back, into the other house, and they got those two people. They had a rowboat there, and they put the people in the rowboat. And then they tied the rowboat and threw the rope across, and Matt Rondo from Texaco Station was driving. It was his Jeep, and they tied it to the back of his Jeep. And so once it was tied, he drove forward, pulled the boat across. The two elderly people got out of the boat safely. So now it's time for the National Guard guys to come back across. So they had strung a rope across, tied to some posts on Castelli's front porch, across to that tree on the front lawn. And so the first guy, who I don't know who he was, came across. I always remember, it was so exciting for me as a kid to see. He had a knife in his mouth, a dagger-like, because I must have been using it to cut through or do whatever. I don't know why he even had it. And he held onto this rope, and he jimmied his way across and made it onto the lawn. So Dick Gaynor was the next one to come across. And before he came across, I don't know what made him do it, but they threw him another rope, the same rope that was tied to the back of the Jeep. And they said, tie this around your waist. So he tied it around his waist, and he started coming across the street on that, holding onto that rope. Onto the rope that was strung across. And all of a sudden, the current got so strong, it just swept him away, and he yelled out, "Here I go!" That's all I remember as a kid. Remember him yelling that. And then Rondo puts that Jeep into low gear, and he drives, and out of the water by the driveway to go out of the old town hall. He comes right up that driveway. Whee! Is that what he said? And they pulled him out. Everybody was clapping because there was a lot of people down there watching all of this stuff. The lights were on because it was at night and everything. So I witnessed that, and that's something that sticks in my mind forever, and it's in my story that I gave to the Historical Society, and I just gave you the copy. One other thing that impressed me, and it was after the floodwaters had subsided, there was a lot of things that impressed me then. I don't know if I can remember all of them, but first of all, the field across the street from the Gilman's funeral home, that had flooded all the way up to the edge of Church Street. It never came over Church Street. The river went past Castelli's house, and it started to veer for some reason. The water started veering into that field and then back into the river. But I remember when the water started going down, I mean, I saw a turtle this huge that was part of that. There was, there was those kind of amphibious, or what do you call them? Turtles and things in the water there. But I saw a big turtle there. But I was also friends, Mike Angelo, myself, and a guy by the name of Karen Carter. We used to call him Casey Carter, KC, because of his initials. And his father was I think he was the editor of the Putnam Patriot at the time. I know he was involved with the Putnam Patriot on an administrative level. I think Minnie McDonald was the publisher of the Putnam Patriot in those days. Anyway, I was hanging around with Casey Carter one day, and he said, "Hey, my father got permission to go across the river to do a story for the paper because the town was separated by the river." And so now the water has subsided, so we start to go up Bridge Street, past where the Duberk's house was, towards the bridge. And of course, there's the National Guard guys standing there because nobody's supposed to be going across, but Casey's father had a special pass to go across. And I remember one of the National Guard guys never grew after this, I don't think. Charlie Perkins who eventually became my neighbor a long time after. He was there with a rifle on his shoulder and everything, and he was guarding and not letting people go across. But Casey's father showed him this pass, and they knew Casey's father really well anyway. He was well known in town. And so we were allowed to go across the bridge, and we walked across to where I had told you previously about Roger Dones and his family on the porch, and Bill Pigeon's barbershop across the street. Yeah. We saw the Wyndham County Observer, we saw the King Oldsmobile Cadillac, all devastated by the flood, and with silt and stuff all inside of those buildings. And we turned, and I think that was called Elm Street in those days. I'm not really sure, but it's the extension from where the Painted Baker is down. If you go down there, that's so we walked down there, and as we walked further north, I guess you would say, on that street, the silt became higher and higher until we got to the houses and the tavern. Trying to think of what name that owned the tavern, but it was like a stucco boarding house and residence where Fred Gagnon lived, who was the first selectman of Putnam. Dempsey was the mayor. Mm-hmm. We still had two forms of government, and Fred Gagnon was the first selectman. And that's where he lived. When we got to that location, we were standing on the silt, and we were looking into the second floor of those buildings. That's how high the silt was. Wow. And there was Place Motors was on that corner of that street that goes up by in back of partially in back of Price Chopper, goes up to the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. That was all the way down to that Elm Street in those days, and I don't know what the name of it was, because there was a Bundy Street, but I think that's where the state highway guys were stranded, I think. Yeah. But I'm not really certain about that. But anyway, that's where we were standing. Tetro's Tavern, that was the name of the place. And the taverns in Putnam in those days, there was a lot of them. But they were all well kept, very clean, and mostly men went in there. If a woman went in, it was an extraordinary event to have a woman go into those taverns. But they were all over the place, because the people that worked in the mills, when they got paid, they'd go in there and spend some of their money. But we were up there on the silt at the second level. Wow. Bazook's store, if that's a reference point, was across the street from Tetro's Tavern. So that was another experience that I had personally, that I remember very vividly. So I don't know. You got any other?
Yeah. How did the flood change Putnam in your eyes?
Well, my eyes went blank for a little while after that, because in 1959 I joined the Air Force and I was gone away. Okay. So the first thing that I saw as a change was the first leave that I had after basic training from Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, because I went from San Antonio to Keesler for training. But when I came home, what I recollect most was driving back over the bridge, how things were already starting to change, because the redevelopment plan, and I have to say that mostly men, I don't know if there were any women on the redevelopment of the town after that, but there's still a booklet, and I'm sure they have it here in that those people had foresight, because if you look at what they did and what they proposed, it's almost the way Putnam looks today. Yeah. And they got Rose Bove-LaRose to, she was a very generous lady that was misread a lot by this community, and I still feel strongly that the Putnam Elementary School should be called the Rose Bove-LaRose Elementary School, to tell you the truth, but for some reason politics came into play. But she ponied up the money to start the work on what we now know as the plaza, or the commons down there now, the shopping center, as so many people refer to it. But I come home, and I'm walking or driving by this, and all of a sudden, and they had to fill that up to raise that. I don't know if you realize that the property that shopping center is on was really a lot lower than that they filled and filled till they got it to the level where they felt comfortable where it is today. And it was all staked out when I got here. They hadn't even started any construction. So that was the first noticeable change that I saw in Putnam. And then I don't know when I first recognized it, but the second noticeable change that I witnessed or saw was the establishment of Kennedy Drive along the river, and how wide it was compared to what we were accustomed to for streets in those days. In those days, if you parked cars on two sides of the street, you just barely had room for one car to go through. So here's Kennedy Drive, a really wide thoroughfare, and I don't think it was initially called Kennedy Drive. I think that only happened after Kennedy was assassinated, that they decided to call it Kennedy Drive. That was another big change. And then when 1963, when I was discharged from the Air Force, I came home I was still 63, I was 22 years old. A bunch of us hung around, guys that I knew from school and from high school, and I hadn't started college yet, so I had time on my hands. And we hung around, play basketball, do all these kind of things. And so I started hearing guys talking about this dam that they were building up the river. And so my buddies were working on it. They had really good jobs. Some of them were just peons who were carrying the boards from here. If they needed a board, the union guys they'd go bring that to them. And I think that's one of the most significant things that ever occurred in the life of Putnam, is the construction of that dam in West Thompson. And I think that story of the community of West Thompson, which was not a big community, but it had like its own main street with a few houses and a couple of little stores. That's all gone nowadays. People don't even know. And where the West Thompson Fire Department was, right next to this little bridge that traversed the Quinnebog up there, now you'd never recognize that there was this little river that went by there, because now you got the West Thompson Lake because of the dam. So those are some of the significant things that I started to witness. And then it took a long time after that before Putnam really turned the corner, I would say. And that happened, as much as people don't like to admit it, but it was the antiques that started to change Putnam. And in those days, people didn't like it because that's all antiques in our stores. That's all you used to hear, you know.
Right.
But eventually, they changed the mentality of this community, because I remember later on in life, when I became president of the Chamber of Commerce of Northeastern Connecticut, I remember Danny Rivero as the mayor and Kevin Shaw as one of the big business people in the town at that time. That was probably around 1989, 1990, in that vicinity, I think. Calling me up and say, hey, can we have a meeting with you as president of the Chamber of Commerce to talk about things going on in Putnam? And sure. So we sat down, and I remember Kevin was complaining because the antique guys were open 7 days a week. And I can't combat that, you know, and it's hurting my business and all this. And I remember what I told him. I said, Kevin, if I was you, on that Sunday, I would open up with minimal staff, put a big table out with a lot of things on it that you want to get rid of, reduce the price, get people to come into your store, and if you can't beat them, join them.
Right.
Which I think some of the people started to do that, and I think that was the change of Putnam, that all of a sudden the restaurants and other things started coming in. I still think Putnam could use a lot more shops with things. You know, we used to have, you probably remember this, Jeannie, how many shoe stores did we have in Putnam? And I remember my father taking the brood of our family, because we had 5 kids, and he'd take us down to the shoe store, Alexander's shoe store, right around where the courthouse is today, courthouse restaurant. And the big thrill that we got, they had this machine, you put your eyes in there and your feet underneath, and you could see where your toes were in the shoe. That was a thrill for us as kids.
It certainly was. I can remember that. But it was X-ray equipment that we shouldn't have been on. They were actually using the real thing.
Yeah, and so anyway, you know, we had so many stores. The women had women's stores. Right. Dempsey's wife and Mrs. McCormick started a kids store at one time. There was another kids store on Bridge Street that Mrs. Larry LaPointe's mother used to work in. I forget the name of that one, but that was right across from the Oldsmobile Cadillac. And Dr. Russell, old guy that had a driver that drove him around in an old putt-putt. That was, every time he came on the street, you stopped to watch him, because we didn't see that many cars, because World War II had really screwed up, you know, the whole country, and it wasn't, the country was just starting to really come out. I remember when my father bought a car, the thing was like a tank. It was so heavy and so rugged, you know, and he came home with this new car, and that was probably 1946 or 47, but forget where the heck I was now with the story, all the things that were changing. But you know what? I think back about, I went the other day, I like my shoes, as you can see. I shine them still. I guess it's a habit from that handed down me by my father, but also being in the military and everything. And I needed to have soles put on one of my pair of favorite loafers. And there's not a cobbler to be found in the area. And there used to be 3 or 4 cobblers. There was 3 or 4 little hotels. The Cargill Hotel, the hotel across from the railroad tracks. That's another story. The trains, how that all changed because of that trestle going down. Right. And when I hear stories today, and I didn't know this at the time because I was too young to understand all of this, but how it would have cost them about $200,000 or $300,000 to resurrect that trestle and keep those trains going. But I can remember my father had to go to Boston and New York after we moved back to Putnam, and being the oldest, he'd take me with him, and standing by there in the back of what's now the Crossings restaurant, waiting for the trains to come around the bend, and you could hear them coming, and getting on a train and going to Boston or going south to New York with him. It was a real thrill, and all of that is gone. And even when I worked at Chandler and Morse Hardware in my last 2 years of high school, there was a few trains, and then they went away. Then the Bud car came in, and that's another whole story we lost. But and I remember people like Sweet Erickson, who had a limousine service. He lived in Woodstock. He'd come and park there waiting for the train to come in, because he'd pick up kids going to Pomfret School or Marionopolis and limousine them to the schools, and he'd stop in the store and talk with Carl Nimick, who owned Chandler and Morse at the time, and I'd listen to all of these stories that these guys were telling. But Putnam doesn't have that. We've got some nice boutique stores, but they're not the stores that everybody can go in and just buy something that you need, ordinary stuff, you know. So, but we've turned the corner. We have the greatest community spirit, I think, of any town, and I always say Putnam is the capital of northeastern Connecticut, and I don't care what other people think about Danielson, Plainfield, or any of these other towns. They don't measure up to Putnam. And the main thing is, Putnam's spirit comes from the business people who are enthusiastic, but the government works like this with them, hand in glove. And that's what I say. If you read one of my stories in this issue of the police newsletter, the chief calls it the hand and baseball glove, because he was talking about being a Yankee fan. But it's the truth. They don't give any handouts. They support everything that the community does. Some towns, they give them $15,000, $20,000 and say, here, business association, do what you got to do. Right. but not in our town. We work together, and everybody comes out on these events. Police, recreation, business association, administration of the town. Everybody's out there working together, and that's why we're so successful. And it is people like that that make a difference, because Danielson, when they had the Killenly Brooklyn Springtime Festival, it was the same thing. Danielson at that time had all these business people, the Don Vachons and the John Canines and the Roger Engels. They were the lifeblood of Danielson, and they were the spirit that lifted that community at the time. As they got older and faded out, Danielson lost its elan that it had. It was
Right.
so. I'm just hoping that Putnam keeps getting young people like Jeanne Bertowski to come around and with all these ideas that she has, and not only the ideas but the follow through. She's one who steps up when she has an idea and says, this is how we have to do it, and does a lot of the work. So, but Putnam's a great community now.
One last thing. If you could pass along one lesson from the time of the flood, what would it be?
Wow. I know there's probably a lot of lessons. I'm not really certain, but I think it's a lesson of courage in a way, because that was devastating. The flood was devastating. I mean, when you see the Altmeyers on Chapel Street in the photographs digging the mud out of their house, it took a lot of courage for people to come back and say, we're going to live back where we lived before. But it also took a lot of foresight and planning, and I guess the thing that I would say is work together, because I think that was one of the great qualities that John Dempsey had. He could bring people together, no matter what political party they were, and I'm sure they had their differences in those days too, like we do today. Maybe not as dramatic as we do today, but he was a unifier, and he was a guy that when he started doing things, he was there to work and make sure that it happened. So I think courage and the ability to work together, and that's what I would tell people. Don't ever give up that spirit. Like Jimmy Valvano said when he was dying of cancer, don't give up, don't ever give up. So I think that's what Putnam's all about. A great past, a greater future. That was the motto of Putnam in 1955 before the flood. And you know, that came true. It became a truism. Great past, Israel, Putnam, all these people that the town's named after, and a greater future. And now we're seeing that. We're living that future now, and hopefully they can continue to build on it and have that future for other people that are coming after us.
Thank you, Ron. Phenomenal memories. Thank you.
I know. I hope I keep it. It's always a worry when you start to hit, you know, I mean, you know how old I am, because in 55 I was 14, so I'm 84 years old and I'm proud of it. But I just try to keep going and do what I can. I don't do as much as I used to as far as being involved in all these activities, because I have the energy, but I don't have that ability to do physical things anymore like I used to, you know. I still walk 2 miles a day, that's about it, and try to do a few little weights, and I should get Bogdanski to give me a training regimen so I can continue to have some strength. But I'm very proud of this community, very proud to have lived here all my life. And you know, I hate it when people talk about Putnam education being terrible. And when I look at the people and the successful people that have come out of the Putnam schools, especially Putnam High School, and I look at my own sons who went to really good colleges and other people who have surpassed them, it just makes you so proud, because you know we have, I mean, I think of the Colin Woodfalls and the Charlotte McCullers and the Francis Curran. Those were very erudite people, and they were very learned individuals, and we had the good fortune of being in their classrooms or being under their supervision as younger people. We didn't realize it at the time, because I was probably a wise guy like everybody else, but you know what? You come to appreciate it later in life.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I could go on for hours, so anyway.